something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Today, my co-host Bryce Greene and I are going to be discussing issues related to these campus protests spreading across the U.S. in opposition to the Zionist campaign of genocide in Gaza. Bryce, as many of you may know, has been a leader of this movement at Indiana University in Bloomington. He was recently arrested and has been banished from campus for 5 years by the so-called authorities. So we will be talking about that along with related issues like the question, is Israel a U.S. puppet, or is the U.S. controlled by Zionism? Or do we have to choose one or the other for some reason? This episode of Devil's Chess Club is available to everyone courtesy of For Died Trying, the new documentary film series which explores the extraordinary lives and cataclysmic assassinations of JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and RFK. There is now a Patreon page for For Died Trying. It offers patrons a number of other perks, including a new For Died Trying podcast and access to the newest film, Chapter 1, The World as It Was, which is also coming soon to other major streaming platforms. Bryce Greene, great to be back with you.
It's good to be back on, Aaron.
And that's not a green screen from jail, so I assume you are now out of jail. But can you tell us about your recent run-in with the authorities in the fine city of Bloomington, Indiana?
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone has been hearing about these Gaza solidarity encampments that are going up, commonly known as the Popular University of Gaza movement. Campuses all over the country are putting up encampments in order to protest their school's connection to Israeli genocide and Israel in general. And IU put up an encampment. The IU Divestment Coalition put up an encampment last Thursday, the 25th. And within hours, they were met with intense police violence. There was armored vehicles, riot police, with assault weapons, pepper bullets. They had a sniper on the roof overlooking everything and a chopper hovering in the sky. It was pretty insane. Luckily, no one was too seriously injured. And I was not arrested, but they swept up, 25 people. But the camp came back and was stronger than ever until Saturday afternoon. They came again, and this time they did the same thing: armored vehicles, the whole 9 yards, sniper on the roof, and they targeted me based on we have a recording of the police scanner that describes, black male, afro, blue shirt, whatever, describing me as an instigator, and the police officer rushed after me, pointed at me, and told me not to run. So I got arrested. And after my arrest, I was banned for 5 years from IU campus and hit with the trespassing charge. If I go back on the campus, I'm liable to get a felony. So we're just fighting that in whatever way we can. But the work continues. The camp is still standing. It's better than ever. It's running like clockwork. And, the university is really, really not taking it's taking a major hit from the outrage over the president sending in the state troopers to disrupt peaceful students. And the reason that they sent it to the state troopers was because you're not allowed to have a tent on Dunn Meadow. That's the rule. The state trooper came in, they on the bullhorns like, you guys are fine if you just take down this tent. Meanwhile, there's an army standing behind him. Like, they sent an army to take down a tent. Like, it just baffles the mind. But we're fighting it. We're still organizing. Faculty's upset, students upset, staff upset. The work continues.
Right. When I was in Bloomington after I came back from Taiwan, the war in Afghanistan had started. It was after 9/11, and there were tent encampments in that park that were there for, I don't know how long, I think more than a year, perhaps. So when did they make the rule about the tents?
So normally you're allowed to have tents in Dun Meadow during the day. Not allowed to have them overnight. Those are part of the rules. But uh, before the night before we announced our rally that we were going to set up the encampment at, they changed the policy and said that you're not allowed to set up any tents at all at any time. And so, based on that policy, they then called in IUPD, who then called in the state police, who then, ran up on us and arrested a bunch of people. So they changed the
Mm,
policy within hours before we were going to have our rally.
yeah.
Pretty
Um,
obvious what's going on here. I mean,
right. Yes, this is not that surprising, except for if you stop to think about it. Why would a war that the U.S. is not in which I don't even call it a war, really? It's a pogrom, you know.
yeah,
Really, it's not like the other side has a military or anything, except for what they can make with sort of, their own the machine tools that are available to them, the small amount that they have. So it's not really an army. It's more like one of those U.S. massacres of Indian women and children, right? Something
right.
like that. Except like they're all they're forced to live in a big concentration camp. But there wasn't the if the university had a more laid back approach to people protesting a U.S. war rather than a uh, Israeli military campaign. I mean, why do you think that is?
Right. I mean, that's the big question. It's like why did they consider the protest against Israel to be so dangerous, to be so important, to be to the point where they called in the army? Like the governor had to approve this. This doesn't just happen. And I think it's because the importance of the state of Israel in different aspects of American civil and intellectual and academic life. Like the lobby has taken over, it's Congress. Like every congressman has to sign I'm not going to mess with Israel pledge. People who work in certain state governments have to sign a Israel loyalty pledge that they're never going to boycott the country. And the the lobby on college campuses wants to suppress the pro-Palestinian speech. That's because it's dangerous to the state of Israel. And all of this apparatus is designed to keep the flow of U.S. arms, political support, military aid, keep that flowing. And so, I described this in an interview a while ago. Any anytime that people raise their heads and say, "Hey, we gotta," why are we giving so much money to Israel as they're committing this genocide? Well, then you gotta whack them down. You gotta keep mowing the grass as they do in Gaza. If someone raises their heads up, you gotta smack them down, tell them who's boss, so then people don't get any ideas.
Yeah, it's very strange, and there's really not much else. It's a totally unique situation in the United States, because on some level, it boils down to the amount of money that Israel's supporters have, that Zionists have. That's a part of it, and that goes back a long way. I mean, I think Harry Truman received a huge campaign contribution that people think may have swayed him to recognize Israel so quickly, and this led to his surprise victory in 1948 over Thomas Dewey, an upset victory, and some people attributed that to like a huge campaign contribution from a Zionist source. Whether it's that clear cut, who knows? But additionally, you have the power of Zionist so-called philanthropy at these institutions. I mean,
Yeah,
I've been at different high schools in Philadelphia where people were worried about doing anything that might upset pro, Zionist donors. And I know of another one around here. These are private schools that are like that. And these are Quaker schools, and you just don't want to talk about. They would rather not talk about the issue at this point. Some of them used to be better and to exchange students, and have sister schools in the occupied territories, but increasingly, the economic model they have is to rely on donors, and there's just a disproportionate amount of Zionist donors, and I believe that they are very dedicated to this, like, ideologically, and that they are networked to some degree to be, thinking about these things, because organizations that rely on any sort of support from the philanthropic sector are pretty much unanimously, or not totally unanimously, but by and large, are very afraid to confront any of these terrible policies from Israel. And then there's the money that they give to Congress. So it's just a very strange situation that doesn't have any perfect analogy in U.S. politics, really.
Yeah, I think back to when I first read your book, Aaron, about deep politics and deep states and whatnot. I think either you brought up this example or someone else did, but John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt's book, the Israel Lobby, is a work about deep politics. It's about these covert and unacknowledged and unaccountable networks of political power that has the ability to shape the American public state from behind the scenes and without any accountability. And so when we hear, at American Exception, Devil's Chess Club, talk about the deep states and deep politics, this is what we're talking about. There's a way that there's an arrangement of powers that allows entities with wealth and other forms of power to influence public policy, public opinion, and just the general culture from behind the scenes without any accountability. And this is how we see some of the more anti-democratic tendencies be reinforced.
Right. I do mention the book The Israel Lobby as essentially a study of deep politics, because it's partly, some of it is covert or not really transparent, but a lot of it is, you do know that AIPAC gives a certain amount of money to campaign, to different political campaigns and so on. So it's not completely covert. It's just, you also don't know the extent to which they are able to coordinate some of these things, between different lobbying organizations. And additionally, you don't know the criteria of really how they operate, because it's not even necessarily the pure amount of money that they give. It's that it's targeted to political opponents or challenges to their political, supporters. Then they could pour a lot of money in. I mean, they're quite strategic about it, to where it is one of the most feared, or the most feared lobby on Capitol Hill. I knew a person who worked for a congressman in Bloomington, Indiana, where you are, and he told me that whenever the Israel lobby guys would come around, their boss would just look like depressed for like a day beforehand, and then like he just looked like he was totally defeated before he'd have to go and talk to these guys who would just tell him how it is. But you didn't feel that you could mess with it. And in the U.S., I mean, the deep political system is something that exists in the U.S. to basically advance oligarchy. It's before there was a national security state, you still had the influence of money, and the U.S. was always an oligarchy. So these different moneyed interests and moneyed groups of people have different power, and they kind of contend for dominance in the U.S. system, and they can make some appeal to the public and get support that way. But it's always been an oligarchy, and we are at a moment of extreme anti-democratic governance now, and Israel is a part of this, absolutely. Now, have you heard about this, or has there been any discussion of this? The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, and this is a Newsweek story, and they have the full list of Democrats and GOP who voted against it, I guess so that they can be shamed somehow. Because, I mean, who wouldn't want to be aware of anti-Semitism? Is there something going on here besides a desire to make people aware of anti-Semitism? Have you followed this story?
Only a little bit, but that's because there was a similar version of this bill uh, that was going through my state house, through the Indiana State House a few months ago. And of course, obviously, we opposed it and organized against it. The bill was it was to codify the use of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, International Holocaust Remembrance Association. It's really just a Zionist organization with a name that invokes the Holocaust. But they put forth a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel as something that could potentially be anti-Semitic. It includes defining Israel as a racist state or an apartheid state as anti-Semitic. It says that if you delegitimize Israel's right to exist, that's anti-Semitic. It's clearly just a political definition meant to run cover for support for Israel, but they tried to put it as the legal definition when addressing anti-Semitism for educational institutions. The bill didn't pass for a number of reasons in the state house, but there's a version of it that just passed in Congress, and this bill does the same thing. It codifies the definition of IHRA of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, in the Department of Education's assessment of anti-Semitism. So when the DOE would go and investigate a place and they were looking for anti-Semitism, well, they would have to use this definition of anti-Semitism. What this means is, of course, that pro-Palestine speech will be officially recognized by the federal government as anti-Semitic. And it should be obvious why that's insane and dangerous for everybody. And the fact that it overwhelmingly is popular in Congress should tell you just how ridiculous this control over our system is by these, this pro-Israel movement.
Right. So if you're pro-Palestinian, that would be technically, according to this law or bill, as the law that would be a law if it's passed. Then if you're pro-Palestinian, you'll essentially be anti-Semitic, and yet the Palestinians are Semitic people as well. So the use of the word anti-Semitism is kind of strange and doesn't really make any sense, but it's just a thing, and so they keep doing it even though it makes no sense. Other groups have changed things to sort of conform to logic more into common use, like or political changes, like it went from like Oriental, they used to use that to refer to people, and then they stopped and said Asian, and they said, well, East Asian maybe makes more sense, and so it's like it would evolve according to logic and so on. The anti-Semitism word makes no sense if you're meaning anti-Jewish people, especially if you're talking about the Palestinian conflict, where all sides are Semitic peoples, and I think Jesus was a Semitic Egyptian too, but that's sort of beside the point. It doesn't make any sense. The IHRA, the Holocaust Remembrance Association, they're really ramping this stuff up into full gear. And the irony of this is that this Holocaust advocacy organization that is working, in fact, to promote a genocide. I mean, this is really what they're lobbying for. It's a Holocaust group, remembrance group, that is flacking for a genocide with this material. And that seems to be what we could say about what these Zionist organizations have been doing for a long time. If you look back at it honestly, I mean, Jeffrey Sachs and others talk about this, trying to explain what happened to Israel that made them go so insane. But he says after the '67 war, they just started talking about facts on the ground, building settlements in the occupied territories. And what does that even mean? It means we want to just steal the land and have it be a fait accompli. And the end goal of that always had to be ethnic cleansing, genocide. So it's been like for decades, it's been really going on in like fairly broad daylight, and yet it's taken, I think, this moment for it to really click for people that this is what's happened. But that's really what they've been doing for decades. Every time that they did everything they could to avoid the creation of a Palestinian state, the U.S. wasn't going to do that. The Israelis were never for that, even going back further to Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion spoke about a plan to resettle, to have some sort of settlement with the Palestinians under JFK. He called it like the biggest threat that Israel has faced so far. And that was before the '67 war. I don't believe that the apex of power among Zionists ever had any intention of accommodating the Palestinians, that they always wanted to be able to kick them off. And we saw whenever there was one leader, Rabin, who had some inclinations toward this, they just, Bibi and his goons killed him, or Bibi, that whole political movement inspired someone to kill him or whatever it was, but it was related to Netanyahu and this new group of, far right people that are now the center of Israel. It's so obvious what this project has been about, and yet we're not able to speak about it honestly, which I think is the key, that it can't be debated honestly. And that's why they're scared now, because people actually talk about Zionism.
Right. And especially with the new generation. It used to be that the media environment was so siloed and so, I guess, tightly controlled, gate kept, that alternative points of view weren't aired. They weren't discussed, and they didn't have to be seriously addressed. But now, with this new media environment, with the use of the internet, say what you will about the internet, but it does allow the public to be more informed and to be connected and to have the ability to organize against these things. But it also means that the apex of power doesn't have a monopoly on the information. They're still able to control things and manipulate it in general, but the fact that kids are getting more and more pro-Palestinian views, they might attribute it to China or Iran or Russian influence operations, but it's just basic humanity. If people are able to see murder and death being done in their name, they're usually not going to like it. In fact, it seems like we're going into after this genocide, there's going to be some talk of something like Palestine syndrome, where like Vietnam syndrome was, where people don't like seeing the images of the death and destruction, so that prevented them from wanting to go and do send in the Marines when necessary. Well, of course, that was insane. People just didn't like death and destruction, but that was a serious intellectual reason as to why people didn't like it. I suspect you're going to see something similar here, where it'll be like, oh, these kids, they have Palestine syndrome. They think that every time people are dying, it's bad, or they think that every time there's a genocide, America is responsible and we should stop it. The discourse is so boneheaded and insane that I think that's where we're headed now.
Here's a question for the day, and I put this as a false choice here because I think that this is a little bit silly, and that the people are being a bit myopic about this. But we've talked about history before, and I wrote about this as well. C. Wright Mills talked about, there's like sort of two ideal types of understandings of history, and one of them is history as conspiracy, and the other is history as fate or drift, right? And this could be thought of as an analogy would be some people who think the Illuminati are ruling the world on the one hand, or people who think that the class structure really makes it so no one really has any agency in politics, and the dialectic is moving things along, and people don't really have much agency. That's kind of an incoherent view a little bit, but that there's nothing that anybody does that matters that much. History moves on because of structural factors. Okay, so those are like ideal types, and like in reality, of course, it's probably something in between structure and agency, something in between those two things. It's not all agency or all structure. Now here, something sort of analogous to this is the question of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. And we have a cartoon here on the left from the very subtle cartoonist Ben Garrison, so right-wing fellow, but a kind of an anti-establishment right-wing fellow. And here, this is just sort of the trope of like Jewish power ruling the world. The Roths, he's got two puppeteers, the Rothschilds, and they're controlling Soros, who controls the generals, which is very dumb, but I'm not even going to bother. But I'm just going to say, to try to deconstruct that. But the other side is just that Uncle Sam controls Israel completely, and Israel is there as Uncle Sam's beachhead in the Middle East, and they just do whatever the U.S. says. Now, I think it's got to be something in between, is what I'm saying. But what is your take on this question? Is how to understand the relationship between the two political entities, the United States and Israel?
Right. Well, when we learn about the deep state of America, the deep political system of America, you can definitely trace it back to pre-war times. But the post-war American deep political system is, very different than the pre-war, just because of the balance of power in the world. That America had so much power that its political system was able to metastasize all around the world. And right when this system started, right after 1945, those are the years in which the Zionist project really took shape and was able to establish, an actual state. And this is when the U.S. and Israel started linking itself. The war for independence was funded and supplied by elements of the U.S. deep political system. The mob, the Lansky syndicate guys, that was closely linked to the formation of the state of Israel, as well as British intelligence, who was, of course, closely linked with the CIA and the U.S. National security state. So all of these forces came together to support this Zionist enterprise. And so they became the foundation of the deep political system in Israel. And so those systems are inexorably linked. There's a lot of overlap. There is some separateness. But saying that one is more powerful than the other might miss the point. It's like saying that one major corporation with this board of directors is more powerful than this other corporation with a board of directors. Some of them overlap, some of them don't, but a lot of their employees intermingle, and a lot of their supply chains are intermingled. It's like, no, it's better to think about this as one system with two public-facing apparatus. There's a public state in Israel. There's a public state in America. And you can consider those separate entities. But when we look at the transnational deep political system, it includes Israel just as much as it includes America. And you can look at this if you go through the parapolitical history of, the post-war history about geopolitics. So many places where you see America, fucking around and doing dangerous intelligence, covert stuff. You can see Israel there. You saw Israel helping to supply, all these dictators in Africa. You saw them supplying U.S. proxy states in Guatemala, running things like Operation Condor in South America. All of these things involve the Israelis, and they involve the American intelligence. And so to separate them out and to say that one is more powerful than the other, it doesn't yield an analysis. But if on balance we were to separate them out, you could say that America is more powerful because they are the industrial base. But in terms of political and decision-making power, it doesn't make too much of a difference.
Yeah, it's been a very strange. It's a strange and suppressed history that I'm just myself trying to get a handle on, and not that many people have really looked at it from the perspective of deep politics, which I think is important because it's been a factor in pivotal events in the U.S. and there's been an Israeli element in it more than I think we've recognized, to big shifts in the U.S. I mean, I heard again, to mention Jeff Sachs, he was talking to the former Fox guy, Judge Napolitano, and he said that the assassination of JFK may have been the most impactful event, decisive event of the post World War II era. And I think that is true, and I think that there is an Israeli aspect to that we don't quite know, if not in the assassination necessarily. Although we're now finding out that those Harvey, the William Harvey Cuban business assassination plots did include the Israelis, and Angleton was the manager of that. And Angleton seems to have been managing the CIA's assassination apparatus, the counterintelligence aspect of it. It seems to have been his, because that's how you would deal with counterintelligence risks like Frank Olson, for example. So this is the person that was in charge of the most sensitive aspects of the U.S. national security state, the security part of it, the counterintelligence part, the part that had to know all the secrets so it would know what to protect, that could potentially be a security risk for the U.S. if exposed, that person was handling the Israeli account, and that account was used in part with Cuban business, and we assume that Cuban business involves Harvey, people that were connected to the syndicate, people like Lansky, who were also instrumental in establishing the state of Israel through networks of finance and such, illicit funds, and helping them procure arms and so on. So we have a strange influence there, and you have Angleton, who is so dedicated to Israel, and he speaks about this in this testimony. He said the reason that the Israelis were so great for counterintelligence and that they would help so much in terms of sharing information about the Soviets and the Soviet defectors, because a lot of Jews would migrate to, Soviet Jews would migrate to Israel, and then they would have all this information. So Angleton was saying that, yeah, they're just the greatest because it's ideological. It's not even about money. It's not even about having to bribe off these people. It's ideological. And the reason for that is that they understand that the survival of their national project depends on the U.S. being A, on their side, and B, unassailable. And I think that this is, in a way, part of the story of the creation of the neocon consensus, which is not, there is clearly a neocon takeover of foreign policy by and large, with some moments of pushback, like when they stopped the war with Iran in 06-07, or when they assigned the Iran peace deal. But beyond that, so much of U.S. foreign policy has been like the Project for New American Centuries, rebuilding America's defense plan, their whole regime change agenda and everything. And so this question of the neocons and what's driving them and how powerful is Israel in this equation is really key to understanding what's happened to the U.S., especially with the end of the Cold War and so on, and ever since. It's been the global war on terror, the Arab Spring Wars, the NATO expansion. All these things are dedicated to a neocon foreign policy that has featured heavily, very Zionist characters like Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, but it's also featured Americans like Rumsfeld and Cheney. So it includes aspects of the corruptible American political system. And who is really in the driver's seat here, or is it some kind of alliance? And is it really necessary that you say exactly how much of neoconservatism has been, ultra right wing Americans versus pro-Israel people? I mean, it's become a political formation that heavily includes a Zionist constituency, but maybe the dominant one. And it has been a total disaster for the U.S. If you say that everything is based on the logic of geopolitics, capitalism, and empire, you need to explain why that we have pursued such stupid policies with Israel, which now, NATO expansion driven by the neocons, and then this business in Gaza, which is not worth the damage that it is doing to the United States from an imperial perspective. It takes some serious explanation.
Yeah, this whole business about the way that America's interests have been undermined by Israel is a real interesting one, because, and we've talked about this before, but if you want to maintain the American empire, if you want to control all the world's resources and dominate trade and traffic and military stuff, the obvious thing to do would be to get all of these different powers on your side. You would want to have the Arabs and firmly within the U.S. sphere of influence. What support for Israel has done is driven a wedge between the oil companies, the interests, the bankers, and the people of the Arab world, and that's made it a lot harder for the U.S. to maintain its system of dominance. Not impossible, mind you, because the Arab leaders can be, just bought off, but it's expensive and it's difficult and it threatens to blow up all the time. I mean, we're seeing it right now. And so the reason any U.S. planner would tell you that, yeah, you're probably not going to want to support Israel there. But the reason that it's so sacrosanct that you have to is because for an individual policymaker making any individual decision, the path of least resistance is to support Israel, even if overall that contributes to a whole that makes your job a lot harder. Every individual decision, which is where the lobby comes in, is one that supports Israel, which is why the in the aggregate, it's just destructive to American empire. And it seems that there are many people in both Israel and America, many politicians who understand that they can't keep going this way, that it is dangerous to invite nuclear destruction the way they're doing, but they seem to be powerless to do anything about it. If there are adults in the room, they don't seem to have a lot of decision making power, and I don't know when that's going to change. It freaks me out, but you can see it manifesting on college campuses, in Congress, where they pass near unanimous bills calling criticism of Israel anti-Semitic, and you can see it in the military, where we're just shipping off millions of dollars of weapons to a lunatic rogue state. Will it blow up the world? Maybe, if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think back to the church committee testimony of Angleton, and they're talking about the nuclear issue. And there's an article that was the galleys, at least of the article, said that within the Eisenhower administration in 1956, it was decided that they would help Israel get a nuclear bomb. Now, that has never been confirmed anywhere, and it would be really interesting to know where Tad Schultz got that information from. But what it may well be that Dulles and Angleton tried to placate Israel because Israel would have been very unhappy about the Suez crisis and the way that Eisenhower entered on the side of the Arabs, essentially. And that was a pivotal moment, and it showed a time when the U.S. was actually thinking about its reputation in the global South and how it would be better not to destroy it, because they'd been doing other things to try to make themselves look not as bad. They sent Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz musician, on a tour to show that there are that America's nice and we have black Americans who are great and popular figures like him, and we're not so racist. And they were even behind, there was even support for civil rights among people like John Foster Dulles and so on, because they realized, hey, we got to go out to the rest of the world and convince them that the free enterprise system is great. Otherwise, if they don't let us in, we can't steal all their stuff. So, that's the logic of these guys. But something happens eventually, and they they care less and less about trying to please the Arab world. And if you talk about this, 1956, if they say to them, we're going to give you a nuke because we understand you're a little worried about this Nasser fellow, so we're going to help you to build your own bomb. But it might not have been Eisenhower. It could have been Dulles and Angleton. And Angleton supposedly told Joe Trento that the reason Dulles put him in charge of counterintelligence is because he knew that he wouldn't investigate Dulles's dealings with the Nazis and such. So if Angleton was so close to the Israelis, and I assume that, he has memorials to him. He has 2 memorials in Israel, Angleton does. I think that if he had the most sensitive secrets, and he was so paranoid and insane that he really thought only like an absolute super crackpot rolling back defeat of communism was the way to go, and Israel was going to be on our side because they believed in the American project because it was ideological, and they understood you had to do what you had to do. That they had the basically fascist mentality. Then he may have given them all of these secrets to blackmail the United States, including, I think, the Kennedy assassination stuff. I think that some element of this, of blackmail, is huge in this story. I have to believe, because that was Lansky's source of power in Washington, was the sexual blackmail. The Epstein network seems to be sexual blackmail as a big component and tied to Israel. The Monica Lewinsky thing seems to bear the hallmarks of that, whether it was, or not. It seemed like a honeypot operation, and it would have been from the neocons. This is a clandestine aspect to this that is even Watergate. Watergate features Angleton and people around Angleton like James McCord doing inexplicable things. So there's a cloak and dagger aspect to the history of Zionism and neoconservatism that's even more obscure than trying to get to the bottom of lobbying organizations and the influence of these sort of entities. It's really a mess, but it's like a perfect microcosm of looking at U.S. history, because we are left to think like, what has really been driving these events and what's going on that we are not allowed to know.
Yeah, I mean, it brings you to the Epstein saga. I mean, the fact that the Maxwells and Epstein were deeply integrated into both Israeli and American high society, once again shows that the deeper system that sits on top of the public state, or under it, depending on how you want to look at it, it overlaps both high societies, both decision-making classes in both countries. And so once again, we get back to this question of which tail is wagging the dog, or who's in the driver's seat. If this deep political system, and like Peter Dale Scott likes to note, that it's not rigid, it's not a structure, but it's a system that grows and shrinks and reconstitutes repeatedly, but it's still there, and it still is able to intervene or subvert or usurp the public state in both of these places. And once the fact that we don't have a way to conceptualize it, it just goes to show how the imperatives of state secrecy and media manipulation are so important to this thing, because they're integral parts. The media and the national security state are integral parts of this underlying deep political system.
They are, and it is changing very rapidly. And it's the whole plan of the U.S. I mean, I'm surprised Biden has not died of a heart attack. You almost wonder if he's senile to the extent that maybe he doesn't quite grasp the gravity of what's going on. Because as much as we've been talking about Gaza and the people there, I think that in terms of the material balance of power and the stability of the Western Empire, what's happening in Ukraine may be even more impactful than what's happening in Gaza. Gaza seems to be affecting the prestige of the West and destroying what's left of it for the rest of the world. And the U.S. is powerless to stop it for whatever reason. There's no way that that real estate in Gaza could be worth the damage to the U.S. reputation, especially at this moment when the U.S. hegemony is evaporating, seemingly by the day. But now we have this disaster in Ukraine where they've just added, the Russians have sent in, more troops. They've mobilized more people. They have this huge artillery advantage. They're not taking huge casualties, as I understand it, but the Ukrainians are, and they're having trouble fielding armies. They have people surrendering. They had to pass a mobilization law. They're sending more women out there to fight. And there's every sober analyst agrees they have no real chance, and yet they won't. The U.S. won't negotiate, and they're going to lose. And what is this going to mean for Europe? Have people down there that you've been talking to about pro-Palestine issues, when you talk to these other activists that are interested in this, do they make the connection between Ukraine and Gaza, or is it kind of too scary for them to want to think about? Or,
well, some do. Some understand that the American empire was just as wrong in Ukraine as just as wrong as they were in Afghanistan, just as wrong as they were in Libya, Syria, and Palestine. But other people, that's the core of the people. Most people understand that if they think about it at all. But some people see the U.S. as, this schizophrenic giant. Like sometimes they'll do something very good, like support Ukraine and get everybody killed. But sometimes they do awful things, like support Israel and get everybody killed. But that's just the nature of American democracy, and it's up to us to put our finger on the scale and try and make the good side win a little bit more. I mean, it's kind of juvenile, but people don't have a formal, real political education in America. So if they believe what the television told them, that Ukraine was a war of democracy against authoritarianism, and that we just all have to stand against authoritarianism wherever. But I mean, people certainly see it as part of this general rot of the American system of the dual party or the duopoly, in which the voices of the people aren't really taken into account. This whole business with Democrats not caring about winning or losing seems to confirm that. The idea that Democrats know that running with Joe Biden and running with the genocide and running the way that they're going is a recipe for failure. But that doesn't matter to them. If you're a Democratic consultant and you see that Joe Biden is about to lose, why do you care? What do you lose if Joe Biden lose? Unless you have an actual vision for the future for this country that you want to enact, then you don't care. Because mostly, if you don't care about what's going to happen when they're president, then it's going to look exactly the same under Trump, under Biden, under Clinton, under Obama, under Bush. It'll look exactly the same. So you, as a political careerist, don't really have a stake in making the world a better place, which is why you can send Joe Biden in there to go full support for genocide and not care whether or not Democrats are going to take the Senate or the House or the presidency. They don't want to change the world. So what do you need the presidency for? What do you need the House for? What do you need the Senate for? If you don't care, it doesn't matter.
It will be very interesting to see if Biden sticks around for much longer. I wouldn't be surprised at all to hear that he expired in office. The stress should kill him at his age and how unhealthy he looks, except you think that maybe he just actually is kind of numb to these things that would affect a normal human being, or else he wouldn't have been able to rise in this system. But it seems he's dead in the water, and it's his policies have been terrible. But then he himself, how is he going to make up for his terrible policies when he has no charisma whatsoever? He just seems senile, and so you can't call him out of touch. Doesn't even begin to approach it. He's like an ailing king in a monarchy who has had dementia for a few years and has had his advisors running everything. I mean, they didn't have teleprompters back then, but it's kind of similar to that. And then with Trump, I mean, what kind of crazy things would Trump be able to do as president that we're worried about? I'm not saying I can imagine him doing some crazy things, but I'm just thinking specifically, given how he governed the first term, what would he do now at this moment in time? Because I think he's going to be left also with irreconcilable things. He's backed by Zionists in the past. Those are some of his biggest contributors. And he's very, his son-in-law is very pro-Israel. But what could he even do? Just start a war with Iran? I mean, that seems to be militarily a non-starter.
Yeah, it's weird to see the Trump administration or Donald Trump himself and the people around him start talking a more conciliatory tone about Gaza than the Biden administration. Once again, the Democrats are letting and kind of encouraging Donald Trump to run as the peace candidate, where he can say, I'm for peace. Hey, I just want to make a deal. I just want to, I'm not ideologically committed to anything, which is generally true. I mean, before October 7th, I think I talked about this a while ago, there was a report that Trump had suggested while he was president that the United States implement a solution in Palestine by refusing to give aid to Israel until they would come to the table. Now, that's a third rail of American politics. But since Trump was unmoored by the Zionist ideology in any like meaningful sense, that was his first thought. He's like, hey, we need to make a deal. What is the leverage involved? Okay, well, we can do it. It's so.
And also, what's the official U.S. policy anyway? Is similar? It's a two-state thing.
Yeah, so exactly. So he's actually, because he's non-ideological, he's actually able to implement U.S. policy.
And he's sort of an idiot too, that he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know the score. I mean,
he doesn't know. Yeah, he doesn't know anything. I mean, it's just like when he came into office and the healthcare bill was, they were talking about dismantling Obamacare. His first question was, why can't we just give Medicare to everybody? That seems to be the easiest solution.
Yeah.
But here, just like with the healthcare thing, his advisor said, oh, you can't do that. You don't understand politics enough, but you can't do that. And so that limits Trump's ability to do anything like accidentally good.
I mean, it's what's so funny about that is that really is if you're a businessman and you were going to run America like a rational business, that is totally what you would do.
Yeah.
That's just the joke of it, is that America only cares about money and money issues, and that's why we've been so efficient, that we're able to just look at the dollars and cents of things and come up with the most efficient way to do it, and that in that way we are number one. But in this case, it's what Trump said was obvious, because you have all these racketeers and rentier interests that are screwing everybody and making it harder for you to hire anybody to do anything. It's so clearly in the interest of the majority to have a national health system, and even Trump would say that, well, why don't we just do that? It's obviously the smarter thing. And then you'd have to be told, oh, no, you can't do that. It would save us too much money, and it would be too good for the people.
Yeah, I mean, literally, that's why they said they couldn't do it. Like, there's a lobby that makes too much money from this, and if we stop them from getting their money, they'll harm us electorally. But I mean, if Trump is president, I mean, I'm not saying that he will actually be a peace candidate. Even though he didn't start any new wars in a long, was the first president not to do so in a while.
He kind of ended Afghanistan too.
Yeah, he ended Afghanistan. But all of this happened not because Trump is, ideologically committed to peace, but because the people around him, the balance of opinions and power and pressures around him just led him in that direction at that particular moment in history. In another moment in history, Trump might have done some insane, crazy shit. I mean, like, he might have the attack on Qasem Soleimani, for example. Like, that could have been, the spark that blew up the world. Very easily could have been that. But who knows what people could push him to do, or he could do absentmindedly in the future.
It is worrisome. He is mercurial, but I have heard him speak about the horrors of nuclear war, and he sounds fairly lucid when he speaks of it, that he actually gets it. Supposedly even Reagan understood this and wanted to have a meaningful treaty with the Soviets to eventually get on the path to nuclear arms elimination. And the advisor who wouldn't let him do it was Richard Pearl, which is great. I mean, that's what the accounts say, that people like, I think it was George Shultz, George Shultz is more of the Bush realist, Kissinger, Rockefeller, corporate liberal dude, which is a very conservative thing, but it's like not a neocon. So the neocons won in that case. And I think that that's kind of the story of our whole time period, that this has happened. So, but with Trump, would he be likely to facilitate the genocide of Gaza? Would he just sit there for that? I mean, how bad would the U.S. looks bad enough when it's Biden presiding over this. I think when you have Trump, who's even more of a repellent figure to most of the world, it'll continue to damage the U.S. image. And these other countries, as you say, Soleimani's assassination could have sparked nuclear war, but it didn't, because the Iranians and the Chinese and the Russians have actually, if you look back at the way that they have handled the U.S. and the U.S. assault on them, which, let's be real, 9/11 became a pretext. Was it planned as a pretext or not? Many people have suspicions, but it became a pretext for really launching a war for a new American century. And the real goal of this, as Brzezinski pointed out, even though he wasn't calling for it, he was kind of calling for a more rational approach, is that you have this nightmare scenario of uniting all of America's, Russia, China, and Iran especially, into a coalition of people with different ideologies, but a really shared grievance and common foe, which is the U.S., the West. And they have done that now. And these actors like Iran, I mean, like Iran's response to the attack on the consulate was supremely rational and shrewd. Yeah. And it's kind of changed the equation there. And now, now I don't know that. I think that the U.S. is trying even more to avoid war with Iran, but they always have tried to stop that. That's the one red line that the U.S. gets basically, they'll do so many things for Israel, including, I believe, like the Iraq War. The more you study these things, the more you see, Larry Wilkerson was just on here talking about how in Douglas Feith's office there were Israeli military officials that were there discussing the Iraq war plans and such with him. I mean, it was the wish list for Iraq spelled out, pretty explicitly by some of these, the wish list for, Zionists and neocon Zionists to go into to go into Iraq, because they didn't want a deal with Iraq with the U.S. just buying their oil, because then Iraq could get powerful and one day challenge Israel. That's really the thinking of these people.
Yeah.
And so they've done this since really gone into full gear in the 21st century, and it's been a total disaster. Ukraine, Syria, Gaza, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, of course. There's no place you can point to that has where we can say it's good that we did these things. And yet they proceed, and China and Russia and Iran acting very rationally, soberly, methodically, and they're going to de-dollarize. I think they're going to defeat the U.S. economically, and militarily we're sort of muscle bound. We can blow up the whole world if we want to, but that's not a strategy for maintaining hegemony over the international political economy, because then there won't be any political economy except for a few survivors exchanging, junk, like a Fallout political economy. Fallout the video game.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, the watching Russia, China, Iran, all these countries behave on the international stage, learning about geopolitics while growing up in the American system, you're always told that, these are just evil regimes who hate America, and that's their primary motivation. I mean, in reality, they don't give two shits about America. They don't have any. There might be some ideological, I don't like America because of this is what they did to us. But they're perfectly willing. China, Russia, Iran, everyone, they're perfectly willing to be on completely peaceful grounds with America as long as everybody can get rich. But it's not been them who has been preventing that. It's been America. America has been, even with China and Russia, the goal is to isolate them. After the fall of the USSR, they said, if we can't fully integrate you into our system, well, we want to isolate you. We got to sanction the hell out of Russia. We got to, sanction the hell out of China. Make sure that Iran can't have a functioning society. All of these things are completely irrational if you want to make the most money. But they're also committed to this imperial project, where if you don't have this system, then we have to expand the system into you. The Chinese, Iranians, and Russians, they're perfectly willing to exist with other systems in the world, with other beliefs, with other cultural inclinations in the world, the same way that we would like to think that America does. They're more pluralistic than us, at least outside of their borders. And they've been behaving in a way that safeguards their security, safeguards their economy, and will move the world towards peace. It's not been them that's been pushing the world towards peace. I mean, the same thing with North Korea. Every American has this caricatured view of North Korea as this lunatic country that's been menacing South Korea and just wants to blow up the world. When in reality, again, they've been very rational about what they want, what they need, how to develop their society. It's been the U.S. that has been menacing them, that's been stationing nuclear submarines off the coast, preventing sanctions from being lifted that harm the Korean economy. I mean, the caricature of a lunatic who can't be trusted is just that. It's designed to prevent Americans from fully understanding the irrationality of their own policies. If the other guy's crazy, then, well, we got to act. If they're irrational and there's still conflict, well, then people might introspect as to why these things keep happening.
Yeah, and we can't really form a consensus about the role of the U.S. in the world that makes any sense or conforms to reality at all, politically speaking. China and Russia and Iran do have a consensus among their leadership, and presumably with much of the population, that the West is a predatory, led by the U.S., is a predatory and dangerous force that they need to accommodate and work with, for their own developmental needs, as China has, but that they also need to construct a, mutual defense against. So they've been rational there, but in the U.S., there is no real, there's very little, there are very few people that say essentially what I would be arguing, which is that the U.S. cannot but be a villainous force when it decides to rule the world, which it did after World War II. And it has been a villainous force because you cannot be anything but that if you want to rule the world. That is a megalomaniacal ambition, and it is demonstrably driven by people who are at the top of a capitalist oligarchy who have gotten extremely wealthy by successfully exploiting their fellow human beings and acquiring, enormous riches because of that. And because of this system, and it's so powerful that it affects sense making in universities and everything else, you don't have anyone saying the truth about it, which is that we are an empire bent on world domination, and since we went on pursuing this, we have been utterly lawless. But unlike Genghis Khan or other empires, we say that we're not lawless, and our violence is covert. Or if it's not covert, it can almost become covert because we just won't talk about it in the media. And really, our imperial status is covert. It's covert, and you're not allowed to speak about it in universities candidly. I don't know of that many professors that would be making the argument that I make in my dissertation, which is why I didn't even entertain the idea of going into the academy really very seriously, because you cannot speak about the most salient fact of American political life, which is that we are the baddies. We are the global villains of world history because we wanted to rule the world. And we wanted to do it lawlessly while pretending to be the paragons of law and order and freedom. It's so obvious to me that this is the case. I think that's why would like somebody who wants to like review my book and tell me where I'm like wrong about this is like, okay, have at it, but nobody has, because I think I'm just saying I've just said what you're not allowed to say, but it's like so clear now, like Taiwan, Ukraine, Syria, Libya, Gaza, we are everywhere that there's bad things. And the more you study them, like they'll think, oh, what about Yugoslavia? We protected them. Actually, no, we ginned up all of that. We encouraged ethnic separatism, and then when the atrocities happened, we used them as a pretext to do what we wanted to do. Or what about Rwanda? Don't we have to protect that so that doesn't happen? And then you find out, oh, we were backing the guy that sparked the genocide or the mass killings, and then who later went on to kill even more people in the Congo. So no, we're the baddies there too. I mean, it's just so obvious, and you can't say it. You're not allowed to say 2 + 2 = 4 in polite society in this country. And that's why our political discussions are so stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, the fact that you can't say this stuff, the fact that you can't, adequately address it, it means that the conversation stops. But Aaron, I think I told you this, and we can follow up on this some other time. But someone who read your book actually cited it in one of their books, and is actually a professor here at IU, or was a professor, but just moved on to another place. But it's encouraging because you are breaking through at least somewhere. And
I've got a few of those.
I was looking at the citations in Google Scholar, and I only got excerpts. I didn't buy the whole digital book, but it looked like they were using your analysis to analyze like black politics in America. And I've always, I've been saying like there's a great comprehensive book to be written about deep politics in Black America, but maybe we can.
That is the original. Some of the original deep politics of the U.S., meaning like those political things that you can't discuss, relate to blackness in America and the creation of blackness and the creation of whiteness, which was really Du Bois said, it was the psychic wage of whiteness that you got in the South, but as a result, in the South, the white people that had it the worst in the U.S. were the poor Southern whites. Like the whites in the North without slavery had it better, but the Southern whites thought we're on Team Whitey, and they even fought in the Civil War, if you can believe it. I mean, that is deep politics. That is like something that you can't talk about the reality. You can only talk about the illusion. So yeah, I'd be curious to bring that person on, the professor. The book looked interesting to me. I think he'd sent it a while back, a link to it. So I'd be up for talking to him about that. But as we wrap up here, Bryce, do you have any way that people can support what you and the other pro-Palestinian people are doing in Bloomington? Because I think people would like to help you all, because there's just not much that's hopeful in the U.S. as signs of life and resistance. And this is I think something really, it's moving to me that these students are doing this and they're not facing a draft. They're just doing it because they don't like to see slaughtered children and such. So how can we, is there anything we can do to help you out there?
Yeah, you can follow the Instagram account IU Divestment Coalition. You can follow I think they have a Twitter as well. I'm not running it, but you can also donate to our supply fund. We have it at Help Ourselves. We are just trying to raise money for supplies and bail if necessary, and we're trying to keep the encampment going until the demands are met. And it's looking like it's promising. I mean, we are amassing a wide base of support. Faculty, staff, students, even some people in the administration, all are against this president, this policies, and with some support, we can make some real change.
Well, I have a little bit of hope that Bloomington will take a good path here because the city is, I have affection for the city and there's a lot of good people in that city. It's the best place to live in Indiana, which is maybe damning it with faint praise, my home state. But Bloomington, I have affection for that city, and I hope that the university and the city end up doing something closer to the right thing. And I applaud you for all the work you're doing out there. So, Bryce, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to Four Died Trying for supporting the Devil's Chess Club. Visit fourdiedtrying.com for details. Please check the show notes for links so you can support Bryce and the other good people out there in Bloomington, and don't forget to sign up for the American Exception podcast on Patreon for the best coverage of the deep politics of the U.S. empire. Regarding Israel and the U.S., remember that you don't have to be the servant of your political ideology. If your ideology makes it impossible for you to grasp certain things, you may have ideological dysfunction, a condition where the interplay between your worldview and your interpretation of reality are in conflict, and so you automatically reinterpret facts and narratives to force them into compliance with your ideology. Think, for example, of leftists who can't solve the pretty obvious JFK assassination. Since capitalism is the dictatorship of capital, and since bourgeois statesmen cannot but be servants to the dictatorship of capital, the bourgeois state could not have killed the bourgeois president, John Kennedy. Therefore, none of the forensic evidence is worth assessing because the bourgeois state could never have a need to eliminate an elected leader. This is the position of many smug pseudo-sophisticates, but it just doesn't cut it if you want to understand how the game is played on the devil's chessboard.